think we have probably one of the best panels of the day coming up. I wanted to thank our sponsors as well. These events are really important because this is a way for all of us to see each other outside of the office, share great ideas. And this panel is an incredible panel. I'm going to introduce them as they come. Peter Hutton, COO, MP in Silva. Hello, Peter. How are you? It's very good to see you. Kelly Cooke, Commercial Director, Head of Digital ex-India, ESPN, Southeast Asia. Hello, Kelly. How are you? Lovely to see you. John Vamvakitis, Head of Sport, YouTube. It really is an incredible panel. Hello, John. How are you? Good to see you.
Thanks.
All right. I'm going to bring Tim Holland back up. Hello, Tim. Managing Director, Perform Group and Video Connoisseur. Thank you, sir. Good numbers today. And Satyan Gajwani, the CEO of Times Internet. Satyan, good to see you. All right, guys. So, Tim, some major brands and interesting partners that you have. How is Perform working with these disparate types of rights holders and affiliates and partners to help monetize? Is anyone making money out of these initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. The mic is on, I presume. It depends on who and where is sort of the real answer, but I'll give you a few examples. So in the US, we work with Fox Soccer, their football channel, quite successfully, and we run a service called Fox Soccer To Go, which streams on a subscription basis across a bunch of different devices, various football leagues. Prior to us becoming involved, which is 2 to 3 years ago now, the service was operating at a pretty substantial loss for Fox. They felt they had an obligation to try this. Again, they had a lot of rights that they were not using. So I think in the Premiership, they would show 3 or 4 matches a week on their main channels, thereby having 6 matches or 7 matches just sit there without being used. They ran the service, it didn't work. We approached them and had a look at the market, their model, and said, well, we have a slightly different idea on this. Why don't you let us run it all sort of soup to nuts? So we'll build the technology, we'll run the technology, we'll market the product, collect the money, and on top of that, we'll give you a minimum guarantee. And they, quite honestly, couldn't believe it and said, absolutely, go for it. And it's been a massive success. Now that works in a market like the US, where there's a big population which is very active with digital devices. But a model might be somewhat different elsewhere. And that particular model works because we have sunk a lot of the costs associated with it already through the mass amount of content that we're ingesting as a company already. So the cost base kind of drops enormously.
Very important. That managing costs by regionalizing your exploitation of the rights is also very important.
Correct. So that's a big broadcaster. On probably a smaller end, we run a product very much like tennis TV called Squash TV. And the philosophy behind Squash TV is that there are a number of squash players, quite a few around the world, but not in high concentrations. So from a broadcast perspective, you don't typically program a lot of squash on television. But squash fans and fanatics would like to see some proper tournaments and are happy to pay, I'm not sure what we charge, maybe it's $100 a year for a subscription, to be able to watch really any major squash tournament available. Again, that model has some additional funding sources associated with it that makes that product come to life. And so we see kind of big sports where we're, utilizing or monetizing unutilized rights or monetizing rights in different ways, and sort of smaller sports where we're sort of bringing them to audiences that would not otherwise have an opportunity to see them.
Okay. Peter, MP in Silva, we talked a little bit about how you're working with your federations and rights holders and partners across Asia to try and do more. Can you talk a little bit about how you are progressing in that area?
Well, I think the key thing for an agency is how do you make the value of your rights increase? And I think that's clearly linked to how do you make people more of a fan? And I think to make people more of a fan, you need to immerse themselves in the sporting experience more. In the same way as if you're at a ground with a full crowd, it carries your emotion better than if you're at a ground with an empty crowd. So as a result, if you allow yourself a variety of experiences while you're watching a sport, whether that be second screen or whether that be multiple ways of viewing and experiencing the same game, then that clearly allows the potential for you to care more about that sporting event. And I think that's the value of OTT, is that you can find ways that build the sport, therefore building the value, building the brand, and for that you go to a federation and say, look, I can do you a good job by doing this, because it ticks all your boxes. It can raise more money, it can make you more emotionally engaged, and it can make more of your product out there and available to people who do care.
Interesting. John,
James.
YouTube has a very specific approach. We're talking about connecting with more fans, building the loyal base of fans and connecting in new ways. Is that part of your strategy for YouTube? You guys have a very interesting position in sport and OTT.
Well, we think we do. YouTube's position really is that we're an open enabling platform for partners. And we put a lot of time and investment into our technology and offer our partners the leeway to offer the kind of content they want to offer in the format they want to offer. So you have a company like India Times and Satyan here, who's kind of got the full global, live, in-country export experience with a very robust gadget that's including live hangouts and up-to-date scores and up-to-date scheduling details, and that's really kind of the full-blown experience. And then you can run down the gamut of partners who would prefer to, let's say, export to markets where perhaps it's not their core market, but they want to get greater reach. So Major League Baseball is a great example. The BWF, Badminton World Federation, is another example. And then on down to short-form snacking and shorter-form content like we see with ITTF and the Table Tennis Federation. And just continuing down the chain to, let's say, taking advantage of your archive, right? I mean, great sport federations have a tremendous amount of content, and allowing fans to access the archive. Major League Baseball is a great example of that. Had a nice write-up in Grantland about what they're doing with their archive, but also then utilizing Content ID to protect assets, to monetize assets, and actually tap into the fandom that's out there and take advantage of your fans' love for your content. So it's kind of it's a broad spectrum. We're not prescriptive. It's really up to the partners to utilize the platform in the way they want to, but it is an open platform, and partners have full choice. I mean, Satyan's team is monitoring daily the performance using Google Analytics, making choices, making changes. There's not an executive producer at Mountain View saying, hey, you should change this. We may give some advice, but no.
Kelly, Satyan touched on some of the uniqueness of individual markets in Asia. But with the depth and breadth of the ESPN offering in digital around Asia, what kind of trends are you seeing currently?
So one of the things that we've seen over the past 2 years really is, from a traffic perspective to our digital offerings overall, we have about 40% of our traffic is now coming in from a mobile or tablet device. And that doesn't mean that our PC traffic is shrinking. So we still have a ton of fans coming to our websites, and actually that number is increasing year on year. But we have, this 40% that's now joining. So it's additive. It's incremental traffic that's coming in from mobile and tablet devices. So I think, for us, what's interesting about that is a couple things. It kind of diversifies our business models a little bit, right? So, initially your reaction is, well, the value of mobile traffic is not as big as the value of PC traffic from a digital perspective, right? But what we're also seeing is an explosion on mobile, tablet, and PC of video consumption, which kind of offsets, it sort of equalizes and right-sizes the amount of money that you can make between the PC and mobile audiences. So I think just here in Singapore alone, over the past year now, we've probably seen, I think it's about a 900+% increase on our video views on ESPN FC, which is the leading football site here in Singapore and Malaysia. So we're now seeing, I think, last month it was about 4.5 million video views from these two markets alone. I think, from our perspective, what's very interesting about that to me is that it's not highlights. It's not match footage. It's basically, coverage from our studio shows. And so, really what we're seeing more and more of, I think, is, around mobile, around video, this is what fans want. This is where fans are aggregating, is on these platforms, and more, usage is occurring basically around video and really on the mobile platform. So I think, that's really where it's going. And I think it was Prince who said earlier that, the fans own sports. And I think, it's true that this is basically, this is what the fans want, and it's ESPN's sort of mission to be there where they are, serving them with the content.
Satyan, with the successes that you've seen, how are the conversations proceeding at Times Internet and with the overall, the group? Here you are bringing sports into 2G, 3G, tablet, PC, everything else. Is this getting traction with the executive level? How are you finding, are other divisions coming to you? What sort of atmosphere is there around it?
I mean, the audience numbers mandate attention from anybody involved, as do the rights costs. So both mandate attention in some sense. But no, I think the thing that really drives most of our strategy is, if it's something that our consumers really love, we have to figure out a model around it. And I think the thing that's most interesting, especially after hearing everybody talk here and learning more about the other markets globally, and I really have more of an India-centric perspective, we're one of the few markets where we've really readily embraced a whole hog, free, live, effectively live product across digital platforms. And in most markets, either it's an authenticated thing, or it's the niche sports, or it's the catch-up rights. It's sort of the ancillary content that's available easily on digital platforms. And I think there are a lot of benefits that people may not realize about having a full free approach. Yes, you do lose on some of the subscription revenues that a broadcaster gets, but there's huge advertising upside on what you can generate there. It's inherently a solution for piracy. For a lot of sports, one of the biggest issues is they're constantly setting up legal teams to fight and try to take down illegal streams. We do that as well, but it's much less of an issue for us because we've got a really good alternative that's there for consumers. And I think it'll be interesting to see how these markets play out, where eventually maybe the Indian market will mature to have some sort of a paid model, and maybe other markets will get a little more aggressive in terms of trying wider audience-based models. But if sports are really meant for fans, it's the broadest reach you can get. I mean, the thing that blew me away was when they were talking about Manchester United, that it's in the league of religion in terms of interest. Inherently you're capping that opportunity when you sort of wall it in a bit. And maybe it's because we don't have the broadcast rights we can take this kind of approach. But it's just really exciting. It's very exciting to be able to broad base your reach as much as we can.
And with the content, great content, and an audience that loves your content, it usually leads to phenomenal results.
Yeah.
Turning it around the other way. Peter, how are you?
I'm okay.
Good. We had a lot of talks about what the opportunity was and when the opportunity was going to occur. In your role currently, what are the things that you're really focused on? What are the things you think you're trying to achieve over the next 2 quarters? Talk to us a little bit about the friction points. What's really got your attention right now?
That's a long list, but I think the key things for me, Satya made a good point on the piracy side of things, in that the video content will find its way out there. I was listening to a game last night, and in a chat room at 3 o'clock in the morning, watching the game, and one of the questions that always comes up in every chat room is, has anyone got a stream? Has anyone got the footage? And I think you can't ignore that. You can't say, I'm just going to stop it being out there. You have to put it out there, but you have to put it out there in the form that people know where it is, that it's presented properly, that there's a quality experience behind the streaming that then supports the broadcast element too. And I think that's the key thing for us, that you have to find a solution to that issue that doesn't ignore the problem. And I think that goes across everybody on the panel.
Truer words were never spoken. John, what's your comment on that? Sports piracy, sports streaming, availability. I think it's amazing that most people know that when you get up in the morning, you can actually get the highlights for last night's match, unless you want to be like Peter and stay up till 3.
Very dedicated fan.
Yeah, hey, he's a good, big fan. Fans, YouTube. What's happening at YouTube right now?
Well, I mean, look, as far as piracy, it's a reality, right? I mean, it just shows the level of interest in the content. People are scrambling around trying to find the content somewhere. I think in some ways it fits well then for us having a more open platform and encouraging partners to keep the content open. It's kind of a game you have to play, right? So you ring fence the content, you charge a certain amount, you hope to generate a good amount of revenue. You don't say encourage piracy, but you're obviously creating opportunities for it. Other way is that you keep it more open, you try and drive it based on advertising revenue, and maybe you convert casual fans and non-fans to consume content also, so you're kind of expanding consumption of the content. So there's kind of a couple different perspectives, I think. I kind of think about the NBA and the way they look at their business and their brand. And it's really about expanding basketball and the consumption of basketball. They take although they're very clear guidelines on how they distribute content, they're also very open on the other side. They try to do their best to make sure that content can be available. And NBA's been a partner on YouTube for a long time, and they're actually one of the partners that takes great advantage of Content ID. They let their fans be fans. They let their fans upload clips and highlights. They don't block them. They let them circulate. They monetize against them. And so, they generate some revenue, but they also just generate goodwill amongst their fans and create an even closer association with their brand and their content. So that's my 2 cents.
Cool. Kelly, how's it going? The numbers are increasing. We're listening to Satyan. We're listening to John V. We've got a great panel up here. Are we ready for this? I'm looking at the statistics on millennials. 17% actually don't have a cable box. 50% don't have a landline. 27% are saying that they're actually going to not renew, but they're still consuming media. What's going on?
I think, and sort of on, I guess, from a broadcaster perspective, the reality is here in Asia, pay TV subscription is actually on the rise, right? And I think as is the increase of, better, or, the quality of technology infrastructure in certain markets where it was limited before. The preponderance of devices, cool devices that people of all ages, including my old self, want to have in their pockets. So I think the convergence of all these different things between lifestyle, the availability and price point of devices, better infrastructure, all of these things kind of convene to finally, this is it. We're here. The year of mobile is finally arrived. The year of OTT is finally here. I personally have been saying it's the year of mobile since like 2003, and I've been waiting for 10 years, and it is here, right? So, but that doesn't mean that consumption on other platforms like television is necessarily a dying breed. It's just an additive experience, right? And so ESPN does a ton of research around, consumption and usage habits. And, you see all these sort of slides of, your average sports fan, they wake up in the morning, they've got their phone next to the bed. I mean, I live with this in my household where, it's like you've got your alerts going off about what happened in the games overnight, especially in this time zone. Digital services are really conducive to finding out what's going on with your teams, especially if it's back in the States or European football. And then you might check in on your PC and do a more in-depth read of things. You turn on the television in your office, or you log into a streaming service from your desk at work and watch the game. But, throughout the course of the day, you're always connected. It's just on different types of devices. But I don't think, from an ESPN point of view, we don't necessarily view this as cannibalizing one or the other. And are there cord nevers? Sure. And are there cord cutters? Absolutely. But there are also people who are adding those subscriptions daily, as there are people who are going to mobile devices daily. All of this, I think it's kind of like all boats will rise for sports media consumption. And we're just basically serving the fans and serving the passion, by having it be available in cooler and cooler, ways through social devices.
All of the conversations, all of the meetings with the board, all of this conversation around cannibalization, and then it turns out this is additive. It's new money, and it's new audiences and new time.
And it's making the sports events more important, because your sense of importance. Justin was talking about pre-game shows and how that allows you to identify better with the characters in the main event. And this is all working in the same sort of direction. It's building up your interest. It's making you care more about what happens. And that's the right thing for the industry, and that's the right thing for the sports brands themselves.
Yeah, I think from an ESPN perspective, we call it the game around the game, right? So owning a lot of those touch points around, owning a lot of the touch points around, the interactions with the fans, right? So one of the best examples, although, not necessarily relevant here in Asia, is around the Super Bowl in the States. We don't have the rights to broadcast the Super Bowl, which is one of the biggest sporting events in the States, but people come to us beforehand to watch SportsCenter and our pregame analysis, and right after the Super Bowl broadcast ends, they're coming right back to us to hear what we have to say about the game. Same with online. We watch these spikes where we may not necessarily be the rights holder, but having that game around the game, the coverage, the analysis, the insight, the stats, the scores, the standings, everything that the fans want. Really, digital just helps kind of feed that passion and sort of frenzied desire for more and more information about your games, players, and what's going on.
Tim, your research seems to bear that out, doesn't it?
It does today, yes. Research document I referred to earlier, is exactly that. TV consumption has not declined, but massive increase across other digital platforms. So it's just adding layers of experience and as people interact with it. But, I'm not 100% convinced that's going to be the same in 10 to 15, 20 years' time. If you look at non-sport genres like general entertainment, I'm of the opinion that almost the broadcaster has almost become irrelevant in that space now. I consume a reasonable amount of that content. I can't remember the last time I actually watched it on linear TV. And does sport go that way for the broadcaster? We have a wonderful advantage in sport, or a broadcaster has a wonderful advantage in that it's probably the one genre you actually care about watching live. You don't care about watching Breaking Bad at 8 o'clock on Monday or whatever. If you watch it at 10 o'clock, you're completely fine with that.
I think most of us that have gone through that conversation have sort of said, look, the broadcast experience is paramount, and the quality delivered by broadcast is so good that the OTT services become effectively part of the support system. I think where that changes is if you take that mental leap and see people paying the big rights fees, even more than Satyan's paying now, to buy exclusive rights and then go backwards. And in that line, it's quite interesting with Perform buying the rights to the tennis, for example. At the moment, it's then sub-licensed out to broadcasters. But if you choose to take that jump and say, actually now with the amount of connected TVs and the amount of 3G and 4G devices, you can make the experience premium, then that becomes the threat to broadcast TV of sports. Everyone up to now has said, yes, sport's the one thing that keeps broadcast TV alive. But if the rights fees change and the providers or if Samsung Smart App buys the exclusive rights to a major sport event, then does that change that whole equation?
Yeah. Well, I think we've got someone here from Coliseum in New Zealand, which has done exactly that. I think if you had asked Sky, New Zealand, if that would ever happen, probably have a very different view from Coliseum, and it has happened. So
it is one of many very interesting initiatives in the forefront right now. The adoption of mobile. I think for every market in Asia, the biggest projects that we worked on together, the ones that were the most exciting, had the most danger. Streaming handsets, Indonesia. Streaming handsets, India. Satyan, what are you going to do to maximize that opportunity? Again, if you could change one thing about your distribution platforms, what would you change and how would you make it better?
I think the challenge in India is more macro. It's the opportunity and the challenge, right? The opportunity in India, you have 700 million mobile connections. You've got data consumption growing faster than anything else on mobile. Voice is flat, data is growing. And theoretically, these are all fantastic headwinds for a rights owner. The two major challenges we face, one is the connection speed, right? There's just a finite amount of bandwidth, and a lot of people are on 2G, and so that becomes a very difficult technical problem, right? So we have to figure out how do we stream at low bandwidth, and I'm beating a dead horse, but it's an important point for us. Two is the device diversity. Android smartphones, low-end Android smartphones are growing the fastest, but there's this huge set of feature phone users that can consume video and do consume video in India, and that has its own order of technical complexity associated with it. And then three is just the cost of data. Especially with video, it's really expensive for someone in India to stream a full match. And people do it. Despite that, people do it. But I think the major headwind that we face on mobile, and that's the thing that we're trying to figure out, is how do we make it more efficient in distribution? Are there multicast mechanisms so that you're not actually consuming so much bandwidth when you're doing it? It's an infrastructure issue in India more than anything. But the long-term goal is very, very clear. I mean, in India you have maybe 100 million people connected on desktops and laptops and whatever that may be. But it's very clear the next 200, 300 million are going to come from a mobile-centric or a tablet-centric approach. And if you look at maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the line, if you've got 500 million people or 400 million data connections in India, I mean, that just dwarfs, I mean, that's now competitive with broadcast for all practical purposes, if not bigger. And so that's, it's the game that we're all sort of interested in, but trying to figure out how to sort out right now.
Is it the game that everyone is in? What sort of resistance are we seeing? We've got a really good audience. We've got a really good panel. Where's the friction points? I mean, is it just so easy we should just call John or talk to Tim and it's all going to happen, or are there challenges?
Not. I mean, I think you look at the existing broadcast business and particularly the strong platforms in developed markets. Sky UK, for example, I met a senior guy there last week, and they're talking about where they invest their profits now to protect against these sort of trends, because they need to protect their turf. They need to invest on Sky Go products so that they control the OTT market as well as the broadcast market. So you're going to see that traditional broadcaster moving into a space that perhaps they're not used to in every market, because they need to claim it. They need to protect against the competition.
And it's very true. A good model. What do you think, John? Do you think it's a model that everyone should be embracing? Should some people not do it? We had so many conversations where we're trying to figure out a 4 or 5 year roadmap. What would you advise everyone in the audience?
Well, first, I'd agree with you saying they should just call John.
Yeah, of course.
And I guess Tim too, but they should call John
Thank
first. Look, again, I think that it's a complex question, right? It's really a complex question. There's a lot of money involved. There's a desire and a need to kind of protect and ring fence the content, and yet the world's changing around rights holders and federations and television networks. You really can't stop progress, as we've said before. If you look back at the U.S. television business 30 years ago, there was 3 networks and PBS, right? And then cable kind of came on the scene, and you've seen fragmentation where a group that had 100% of the market share went to having 25% of the market share, and 75% went to cable. And when cable networks first started, people said, who's going to advertise on that? Content's not high quality. It's kind of difficult. And you've just seen that evolution, and I think we're seeing another set of evolution here. I think sports will probably be the last bastion, or the harder one, the one that will be the last to the party to change. But over time, it's going to change. I think one of our previous panelists talked about how his kids don't consume sports in the way that maybe we grew up consuming it, right? Except maybe for Kelly, because she's much younger than us. And that, and my kids are the same. They're really hooked into online consumption. They have a lot of content they want to watch. Some of it's sport, but a lot of it's other content. And they don't need to sit and watch a 2.5-hour linear broadcast of something. They're very happy to see highlights or clips and move on to the next thing. And I think actually we'll find for maybe the generation above my kids that they are the same, because time is now so precious, right? That you need to optimize your time for everything you do, whether it's working, whether it's your leisure time. And it's almost like a nice kind of treat for yourself to sit down and watch a football match, let's say, for 2.5 or 3 hours. It's almost, like I used to go golfing a lot, and I don't do that anymore because it's about a 6-hour investment, and, won't be married for very long if I continue to do that. So I see the same kind of thing. It's going to change. There will be, obviously, stakeholders who need to do their best to protect themselves, and maybe they'll be effective. But I think over time, this platform is going to get stronger. It's going to get better at monetization. It's going to give a lot of choice. It's going to be able to replicate all the best elements you see in a pay TV platform with a lot more flexibility, with a lot more interactivity. So I think it's going to change over time, and I think that you're better off as a league, federation, rights holder, network, getting involved and understanding how to make it work for you best. And there's a lot of ways you can do that, which don't necessarily have to encroach upon your live rights, but to, again, interact, engage your fans, understand the data, use analytics to understand where people are consuming, what they're consuming. There's a lot of value there. And I think it's not a great long-term strategy to ignore that.
True. Years ago, I recognize this myself because many, many, many years ago, we were trying to figure out what would happen as TV migrated to new platforms. And what we didn't really see was the fact that 80% of people watching television would have a second device in front of them while watching television. Thank you, Google Insights. So there's already a second screen that's closer than the broadcast device to your audience. Are you guys picking up on this? I mean, I know that we've talked a little bit about social, but how are we enabling brands to have a deeper conversation, even the way that we convinced a great watch company to support Formula One? They were instant believers that the audience, they could have a better conversation on a tablet while the fan was watching television. Is there any sort of second screen conversations happening with you guys?
Well, I think before you even get to that, the conversation about social, I mean, you've sort of hit on one of the biggest and best points about digital services, which is that connectivity to fans, which provides you knowledge about who they are, right? So as ESPN in Australia, for example, where we have our broadcast feed, and as a fan, you're sitting on the sofa, you might be watching our channel on air, and you're consuming, you're on one of our websites, or using one of our mobile apps as you watch. We don't know much about you if you're watching the broadcast feed, but we know a ton about you from the digital platform perspective, right? So just with our basic kind of Omniture analytics, ComScore data, we would know possibly, your gender, your age, whereabouts in Australia you live, what sites you just visited on your device, the sites that you'll go to next, the amount of time you're spending with us. We have a really, we get, on average across the region, we get about 17 minutes per visit, which is a tremendous amount of engagement if you think about it in comparison to other platforms. But we would have no idea how long you're watching our broadcasts for, right? You could flip it on, you could spend 2 minutes and move on, or you could stay with us for the whole match. We may not know that data belongs to our platform partners. So to have that kind of just the pure data and stats on who your fans are is a huge point of differentiation from where we were in this business 10, 15 years ago. And from there, you can really sort of take that data and, start establishing that meaningful connection, that connectivity with your fan base because you know more about them.
Doesn't that just mean more work? Now suddenly we know all about our audiences. We have data management platforms, DMPs, SSPs, all these different supply side and demand side. Wow, it just sounds like digital is hard.
Yeah, but it also means you understand what your audience is watching, and I think one of the things that we saw on the streaming of Formula One, for example, is you see those dips of audience. It peaks at the start, it dips, and it comes back towards the finish. And to understand that that's your problem, this is the area of the game where you need to throw more effort at it to keep your audience engaged. All that helps you, and it helps your advertisers, it helps you deliver a better product.
So the second screen's enabling you to connect with users in the middle of the race where it was traditionally a dipping time.
Absolutely, and that whole fundamental business where, I think one of the dangers we talked about at ESPN Star was that you were not directly connecting with your consumers. You were directing as a B2B product effectively with a pay platform. And this opens up that potential of direct conversations with your consumers, both in a way that improves their relationship through a pay provider and also provides you leverage against that pay provider. Because if they switched you off, you can still connect with that audience. You don't necessarily need that pay PV provider, and I know the guys from Astro and StarHub and the rest are in the room, but you don't therefore need them to say, if you don't show it, I'm still going to be out there and broadcasting. And that's great leverage for a sports brand, for a sports federation, and allows you to have a far more sustainable business.
Interesting point. The partners that we work with are actually actually quite engaging. It has not led us to be more confrontational. It's actually led to some amazing partnerships. You mentioned, Singtel, StarHub. They actually were some of the most proactive partners that we had in broadcasting, and actually pushed us to do the broadband release of the ESPN products, to do the tablet releases and the mobile releases. So in fact, there's an interesting dynamic of brands and broadcasters working together in that respect. Satyan, do you have good partnerships that are driving your business forward outside of the internal group?
Yeah, I think, from a little bit of a selfish perspective, the conversation with advertisers when we talk around IPL helps us throughout the entire year. So there's a little bit of an advantage from that. But, while we have these amazing growth numbers on digital, the reason that it's able to be a free product is that it's really not viewed as threatening to the television business in any sense. And so what happens is when we go to an advertiser and say we want a really serious chunk of change to be a participant on this platform, it's always a little bit of a challenge because it's perceived as the secondary screen, right? It's not the primary screen, is the television still. And so that creates more of a challenge upon us. And so, John and I, we've worked together on this for a while to say, how do we create a better value proposition for advertisers that's more than just, an ad spot on the side and a pre-roll before the video runs. And so, it comes into the same things that we all talk about, which is more participative, more conversation-centric, taking advantage of the things that digital gives you, and figuring out how to use those to make it more interesting for the advertiser.
Good point.
Yeah, just tag on to that, James, if you don't mind. That's what we think works. We try to talk to sponsors. It'd be great, with some of the sponsor partners here in the audience to have a chat after about what are they really looking for. It's a question we ask often, and we don't always get answers. We are looking to try and create a more robust experience and a multi-layered experience and create opportunities. I do hear in a generic sense that sponsors really want to feel like they own an event or own a property, right? They don't want to be the guy running just a mid-roll, in the event. They want to really feel like they're around it, that they own it. And we're undertaking, tactics to hopefully meet those needs, but it'd be great to also at some point, I'm not going to have an open forum and throw it at the group now, but it'd be great to understand a bit more about what sponsors are really looking for. Are G+ hangouts that surround the IPL before, during, and after interesting to them, right? What other elements do they want? How else do they want to integrate themselves into the event and feel like, I am part of IPL. I'm not just the guy who's kind of footing the bill with mid-rolls. So.
It's very important. Kelly, final thoughts? Don't look so shocked.
Final thoughts.
I can do some final thoughts while you're thinking. How much time do you need? A few minutes? All right. I think final thoughts, maybe nothing really tremendously new or insightful, but the second screen I think is going to be pushing more towards to be the primary screen, right? So this phone here in my pocket is going to basically control everything for me, and my ability to push content from my phone to my big screen. My big screen will kind of be, I don't want to say a dumb device, but the phone will control and run everything. We'll have obviously more and more consumption of mobile, especially in Asia. We have about 25% of our consumption right now annually is on mobile, and in Korea and some of the MENA markets, it's well over 50%. So that's one thing. And then I would just say, generally a kind of more macro observation, which maybe isn't anything brilliantly insightful, but it's just continued fragmentation and continued breaking down of the kind of content that people want to consume. I'm just talking about sports in general, but more shoulder programming, more interesting takes, more clips and highlights, perhaps more short form after the fact, time shifted viewing. So those are some things I think.
Good point.
Enough time?
Thanks, John.
I think my final thought on this is to touch on something you said before, which is about the sponsors. I too would love to meet any of the brands in the room who are interested in connecting with the digital audience. But what's interesting to me about this is, at Sports Matters, Digital Matters, you hear a lot of us talking about how many fans we have, aggregated on digital platforms across Asia. But there does still seem to be a big disconnect between the fact that all the fans are there and that's what they want, but the sponsors aren't there yet, right? So they still attribute, a small piece of their budgets to digital spends. So I think there's still a pretty big disparity in kind of the fact that the fans have already made this leap, but the brands and sponsors haven't necessarily followed suit yet. And in order to keep, funding sort of the innovation and, the growth of the availability of these cool new services, that gap needs to close.
I think one thing we should look towards is that ability that sport uniquely has to decide what method of media you purchase to actually experience the sport. So I think the hardware manufacturers, whether that be cable set-top boxes, whether that be DTH providers or smartphones or tablets, I think those hardware manufacturers are going to have an increasingly large voice in this. Yep. And I think that's the market that we now start talking to as an agency and looking for how we develop our sports content sales.
Okay, I mean, my view is very much that the tailwinds are with OTT very, very strongly. Everything from connectivity devices. I think the federations want to understand it more, experiment with it, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it becomes increasingly challenging for broadcasters going forward to while they may compete in it, they'll have the federations potentially lining up against them to be part of it. And I'm not predicting the death of TV by any chance, any stretch at the current time, but what will keep them in the business is money and rights fees for a considerable future. But
good point. I
think by the end of this panel, if you're a broadcaster, you'll be feeling kind of crappy by the end because there's a lot of talk about how it's all shifting away and whatnot, and of course there's some of us who are sort of looking for that because it's an opportunity for us. But and it has nothing to do with me, but just as an outsider looking at it, I think there's actually a great opportunity for broadcasters in the fact that to take advantage of the fact that sports are live and this idea of participation is inherently a live event. So John is right that, in a time-crunched society, we're more interested in highlights and condensed games and summary after the facts and whatever it may be. But the challenge and the opportunity for the broadcaster is to take advantage of these levels of connectivity and actually integrate into the production layer itself and find interesting things you can do that are inherently live-centric, right? So you see TV shows integrating hashtags directly into it. You see during games now people sharing real-time commentary that people are talking about. You see live polls that are showing, directions of it. John and I are talking about weird ideas of new cameras on the field during matches and things that you can do that are just inherently far more participative than you could have done 5 or 10 years ago. And as a broadcaster, that's the opportunity, because if you're looking for reasons why I need to watch live and why I need to watch on that platform that I'm so used to watching on, these are the things that you can take advantage of. Because if it's just a linear feed of a game and we treat it as a commodity like that, then, John's right, it will fragment, it will go across 100 devices, it will be available for 100 people. But if you can make that experience non-commoditized and do interesting things at the production layer, I think that's where there's a little bit, at least some more headroom for the broadcasters to just, create more value.
Excellent. The topics that we covered today will explode into your inbox over the next few weeks, and we kind of let those stories unfold later. You're going to have a distinct advantage because now you can utilize these systems and you can formulate questions and you can talk to this panel and actually engage different aspects of the solution. And that's probably the best advice I can give everyone in the audience. Get to know these people. Each one of them has a wealth of knowledge about how to avoid cataclysmic risk in your portfolio.
Or how to create it.
How to create it, how to monetize it, how to go to market. No one's got the perfect answer, but if you wait for the perfect answer, it will overrun you. I thank you all. This has been a great experience. I'm really honored that we were able to spend time together. Can I please get a hand for a great panel?
Thank you. And thanks to you.
No worries.